Alright everyone, welcome back to another video. Last time I left off with the middle colonies, talking about the colonies of Virginia and Pennsylvania, and obviously also Maryland and Delaware. And a few other figures in that little timeline, like Sir Benjamin Franklin. But we're now on to America, French or British. From the Revolution of 1688, which brought the Dutch Stadhouder, head of state, to the British throne as King William III, to the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, there was a succession of wars to curb the ambitious power of France. Three things were at stake: Europe, India, and North America. Sometimes it is hard to tell whether there was a European conflict which spread to the colonies, or a colonial struggle which spread to Europe. Some historians have termed this the Second Hundred Years' War with France. Of course, there were long periods of peace between wars, but neither was the First Hundred Years' War continuous. The real difference was that in the 14th century, English kings were striving to make good their title to rule France. In the 18th century, no one thought of such a conquest. It was, rather, so far as the British were concerned, a conflict to determine whether French or British colonial imperialism should predominate. The colonists, instead of using European names, usually referred to each war by the name of the monarch then ruling. Thus, the War of the League of Augsburg became King William's War. The War of Spanish Succession, Queen Anne's War. The War of Austrian Succession became, oh boy, this is getting lost. There's a lot of whole things here. The War of Spanish Succession, Queen Anne's War. The War of Austrian Succession became King George's War. The 7 Years' War, however, became the French and Indian War, because the Indian allies of the French seemed almost as great a danger as the French themselves. These were not total wars like the two world wars, but rather wars with limited objectives, frequently ending in a compromise and sometimes in a shift of alliances. The ally of yesterday might be the enemy of tomorrow, but at no time during this period were France and Britain anything but hostile. The French had certain advantages. They had the larger home population, stronger army, a centralized command, and the friendship of more Indian tribes. But the British assets were, in the long run, more important. Sea power was theirs, and colonies could be reinforced only by sea. Though the French Empire in America was more extensive, it had a much smaller population. It was bureaucratically managed, and the men on the spot were poorly supported. In India and America alike, France was a continental country and had at all times to defend her European frontiers, whereas the British, secure behind their fleet, could concentrate on colonies, commence commerce and shipping, both mercantile and naval. By the time of the Treaty of Utrecht, 1713, the British controlled Acadia, which they named Nova Scotia, and expelled many of the French inhabitants, some of whom reappeared in French Louisiana as Cajuns. But there was no culmination until the French and Indian War, 1756 to 1763. Early in that struggle, the English commander, Edward Braddock, fell into an Indian ambush, George Washington, in charge of the American militia, succeeded with difficulty in saving some remnants from the defeat. But the war, as a whole, went in favor of the British. General James Wolfe sailed past Quebec, climbed the steep banks of the St. Lawrence, and defeated the French commander Louis-Joseph Montcalm. The fall of Quebec virtually ended the American phase of that war. The British fleet prevented any relief to New France. The Peace of Paris, 1763, gave French Canada to Britain. It also virtually ended Marquis Joseph Francois Duplessis' hope of a French empire in India, leaving Robert Clive triumphant. A concedent treaty at uh, Hubertsburg signaled the victory of Frederick the Great over Prussia over Maria Theresa of Austria. Seldom has a peace settlement been more decisive or more gratifying to the victors. But some observers were intelligent enough to see that in the very completeness of her victory, Britain had imperiled her hold on the American mainland colonies. What need had the American colonists of a mother country now? The Spaniards were weak and far away. The Americans, from long experience, understood Indian warfare better than did the British regulars. France had been their sole dread, and this had been removed. This would not of itself have meant secession. Canada, New Zealand, and Australia remain content within their British Commonwealth of nations today. But it required very intelligent and systematic handling of affairs to keep the 13 colonies loyal to crown and empire. I'm just making sure. But yeah, I mean, this talks about quite a few things. One thing actually it does mention is 7 Years' War not being a world war. Some people would actually consider it kind of the First World War, really. It really is kind of all people on many, many different fronts all over the world fighting. Kind of could be considered that. But yeah, the French and Indian War in the Americas, or North America specifically, is the section of that war that happens over here. And they kind of brush over it a little bit, but George Washington might be uh, somewhat responsible for that whole war kicking off. It happens. But to be fair, something like this would have happened no matter what. Even if Washington accidentally or something like that happened, it would have happened eventually. This coming to a head of British or French control of North America, it was going to happen. And when it happens, obviously, who knows? But it was going to eventually. Um, both of these nations wanted this land. Of course, it's big land, a lot of resources, things like that. Um, but how they try to keep it, that's what hurts it the most. The British, trying to keep it, spend a lot of money and a lot of resources on the colonies. And then when they expect, to be fair, deserved payment, the colonies, not having have dealt with this level of control, start to get a little unruly, you could say. And it really does end up hurting the empire. The colonies will secede. And that enemy that they were so afraid of, the colonies specifically, France, will be one that helps liberate them. And that just interesting little part of that whole thing. But now we'll get into the pictures. Above here is French Canadian soldiers were often equipped with snowshoes in order to traverse the winter landscapes. You can see the big old snowshoes, kind of like what we see in movies and stuff like that today. They are very useful. I believe they come from the Eskimo people, the Inuits. Someone correct me, I guess, if I'm wrong, but I believe that's kind of where those whole things come from. At the left here is an engraving made by Thomas Johnston. showing Quebec, the capital of New France. A Bishophic? A Bistropic? I don't know. Bishopric. I don't know. It's a very confusing word. And seat of the sovereign court. In the foreground is the St. Lawrence River. In the distance at the far left is the citadel, which exists today. The scene shows both the upper and lower town. At the far left in the upper town is the castle. The Cathedral of Our Lady is the building with the highest tower, and the bishop's house is down the hill directly in front of the cathedral. You can see quite a bit right here, highest tower. Yeah, you can see it's obviously very much a stylized thing, but a lot of these things did have great detail, and they have a great understanding of what they were looking at. And you can see even here, it's also broke down 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 17, 14. You can see really a bunch of stuff broken down by number. But yeah, Quebec, obviously, very French still today, French Canadian. You can definitely tell when you talk to them and things like that. A lot of French, obviously, and they also talked about earlier the French in Louisiana, right there, in French Louisiana. Yeah, a lot of people down there, Cajun, it's a mix of French and a few other things. It's really interesting. At the top right here, one of the decisive battles of the French and Indian War was the defeat of the British commander, General Edward Braddock. Yeah, the defeat of Braddock, I mean, it's a pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. And at the right here, an early British thrust into Canada was the taking of Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island in Canada. Here, in 1745, here the British forces of New England are being landed. Yeah, this is the colonial flag. It's the Union Jack with just a red flag. I'm going to say right now, it's one of the reasons, just saying, one of the reasons the colonies probably didn't like you guys very much. You gave them that flag. That flag is atrocious. What is this? Like, come on, that's atrocious. Okay, if you're gonna put the Union Jack on a flag, there are ways to do it. Okay, there are ways to do it. This is not it. This is not it. This is awful. I hate it. I hate it. And then we have a little overleaf here. We'll show Quebec because that's what it's more talking about. The results of the Battle of Quebec included not only the final defeat of the French in Canada, but also the deaths of both commanding officers. Generals or gens James Wolfe, the English leader, and Louis Joseph Montcalm, the French leader. This is the death of General Wolfe as painted in 1770 by renowned Benjamin West, an American artist who studied England. They talk about this. I think I understand why. So that is what they're just talking about there. This is good. That's a little thing. But this is the painting they are talking about. And this is obviously a very well studied painting, very well seen. And it's very, very detailed. You can see, obviously, Mr. Wolfe there. Not doing too well. And yeah, having both your commanding characters, really, in this struggle die, definitely not helpful. Yeah, you can see. I'm going to be honest with you. I love paintings. This is such a great painting. It really shows so much depth in the characters and what they are thinking. You could see everyone's reaction to it and really understand kind of what their thoughts are. So very, very interesting. But with that, that is going to do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you have any ways I can improve these videos, leave a comment down below. I always appreciate your feedback, and as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.